Hello, educators. Welcome to Anak Power Talk. My name is Bharti Patel, and I'm a child rights and social justice advocate. My brief background about me: born in Uganda, a country of East Africa. My parents are from Gujarat, India, who had migrated to Africa in the 50s. My primary education was in Uganda, but we very quickly had to move to UK, having been expelled by the then Prime Minister Idi Amin. Interesting and scary times for a 12-year-old girl. My academic qualifications: I have a BSc degree and a graduate diploma in law, both from the UK. My professional background is that I'm a human rights campaigner and advocate. And for the last 20 years, I've been advocating for the economic, cultural, and social rights for children in particular. I've worked as a CEO and director at non-governmental organizations, both in the UK and in India. So that's basically my background. I have titled this particular Power Talk as Social Justice for Children, Teachers, and Educators. And I want to thank you all for time to watch this short presentation. And my thanks, of course, to the technology that allows us for remote learning across the globe. I speak to you all from my home in London. I'm hoping to give you some insight in this subject, and I would welcome your feedback and your views on this topic. So thanks again, and let me begin my Power Talk. Social justice, what is it? These are buzzwords that have been around for a long time. We all use it, whether you're activists, you're academics, or even the government. We all use it on almost a daily basis when we talk about things like poverty and equality. But there is no official definition of social justice. So I think that's the bottom line. And all of us have different ideas of what that is. For me, there are principles that makes social justice. And these are principles of fairness, equity, participation, which is quite important, diversity, human rights, but also duties and responsibilities that we all have as human rights, as human beings. Access to resources without discrimination. Now, we all know that one of the reasons for injustice, particularly social injustice, is because there is all forms of discrimination, whether it's based on caste, religion, gender, race, disability. I'm going to touch a little bit on that later on. It's also a vision of a society where all of us, whether it's children, women, and men, deserve equal economic opportunities, political and social conditions that are safe. It's also the structuring of the societal institution, and that means the education institutions, it means political institutions, it also means academic as well as non-academic, so includes private sector as well. That guarantees every human being their right and dignity and ensures opportunities for free and meaningful participation. So that's my understanding of social justice, and I'd love to hear your views on it. Okay. As educators and in education, why I believe social justice is important. First of all, just look at what teaching is. It isn't a job, and I think everybody knows that. It's more than that. It's almost like it's a calling, it's a passion and commitment and a desire to amplify the voices and the dreams of many children whose lives touch them. You touch them, much as educators touches theirs. So I think it's important to remember that it's beyond just the kind of teaching of numeracy and literacy, which often is the case. This is a big order, tall order for many teachers to meet. And I think many of us come into the job knowing that we want to make a difference, that we want to teach children that become somebody in the future. How has the education landscape changed, and what does it mean in the concept of social justice? The education sector has experienced a shift both in mindset, in priorities, in terms of physical and social learning. We are very much aware of it. The recent COVID situation has highlighted the need to prioritize the need for physical and social learning. It's also the shift to learners and educators. It's given a glimpse to learners and educators of the future and how to make teaching and learning better and more successful. What we've seen is how millions of children, as a result of COVID, as a result of the shutdown, have lost their time, have lost their access to education. And yet you've got millions of children that have had fantastic access to education during this period, offline and online, because they have the right resources. So if the goal of social justice in education is full and equal participation of all groups in society that is mutually shaped to meet their needs, the question I think I want to ask, and I'd like people to ask, is how will this new shift result in achieving social justice so that every child and every student benefits from this shift? What rights do children have to expect quality education and justice? And from whom? And then whose responsibility is to guarantee that no child is left behind? Let's have a look at where I think the injustice lies as far as education is concerned. Now, when I read these figures, I've seen them hundreds of times as part of my role, but it always still surprises me that despite the so-called progress, so-called legislation, promises made by governments across the globe, we still see large, and we're talking about millions of children losing out. I'm going to not run through all the figures, but a few of them quite important. 264 million children are denied access to education. A large number of children, 152 million children, are victims of child labor. That's because they haven't got access to education, but also because the situation of their parents is such that they're unable to provide or to send their children to school. 759 million children parents do not have the skills to improve their families' living conditions. I like this one. In Africa, I don't like it, but in Africa, 9 million girls never go to school compared to 6 million boys. So here's another form of discrimination, the gender discrimination. Let's look at what the figures are for India. You may have different figures. This is what I've picked up. After 8 years of schooling in India, 43% of 14 to 18-year-olds could do simple division. I think that should say could not do simple divisions. More than 40% couldn't tell the hours and minutes from a clock, and 46% did not know which city was the capital of India. Of course, I used to think it was Mumbai, but we all know now it's Delhi. Such a shared thing. What's happening to that? Examples, and just to think a little bit about this. Is this social justice? I'm just going to read out the first one. I talked about what's happening in India, but let's see what's happening in the UK. UK universities are institutionally racist and they must do more to support the students of color. This is coming from a leading vice chancellor of a university. A young man, Zach Adam, 19 years old. He's in the first year student. He said he'd been accused of looking like a drug dealer by the University of Manchester. Security officers who held him up against a wall and demanded to see his identification. Is this racism? Is this social injustice? In the UK, I think it's now increasingly becoming clear that this is discrimination against certain groups of people and therefore bringing social injustice to them. UK schools recorded more than 60,000 racist incidents in the past 5 years, with the government failing to meet basic safeguarding measures by hiding the true scale of the problem. This was reported in March 21 in a well-respected newspaper, The Guardian. So what we see here is examples of injustices, not just in the so-called poorer countries, which is often what gets highlighted, but also richer nations like the UK and also the States. There's a good example about Minnesota in the US. if a new secondary school were to be planned, again, is this injustice? Where would it be? Statistical analysis shows that villages where non-ST, SC communities dominate, this is the social castes, is twice as likely to get it than where Dalits or indigenous communities make up most of the population. This was again in the Times of India recently, only last month. These are some of the examples of social injustice that don't obviously come to mind when we talk about it. What I think determines where people have social justice and where there are injustices, really it's about a person's wealth, it's about their gender, it's about where they live. It's also political and environmental situation that they are in, which continues to determine access to quality education. One of the things I think many of the countries highlight and very proud of is the fact that they have increased the numbers of children that are now attending schools or signed up to be in schools. But what is not happening is many of those children are not getting the quality educations. And I raised some of the statistics there. Well, children coming out of schools still not being able to read. Inequitable distribution of resources undermines efforts to improve that standard of living for low-income families. Look at this one. 46% of resources are allocated to educate the top 10% of the most educated students. You can see the imbalance here. Children of wealthier families receive the lion's share of that state education funds. This is in low-income countries. Higher income countries like the UK and the US, you still see that the private sector is only accessible by the rich. This is where the fees are very high. 65%, that's $3 trillion of the 4.7. So again, 65% of the annual expenditure by governments, households, donors is spent in high income countries, with just 0.05% in low income countries. This is social injustice. Children have rights, and I think often these rights are not respected, not adhered to, which then result to children being denied fairness, treated with indignity. The standard of living, they have a right to a living that meets their physical, social, and mental needs for holistic development. Important bit is they have a right to be heard. This is their right to have a voice, to express freely their understanding, their needs. I know many of the children that actually don't know that they have this right, or if they know it, they are silenced. Best interest of the child, again, when any decision is made on behalf of the child, it is very important, whoever makes this decision, that they take into consideration what is best for the child. Often the parents decide what's best for the child, the institutions decide what's best for the child. The child is often not part of that conversation. Every child has a right to demand and claim their rights. In practice, however, we know that their needs and voices are silenced, as I said. The other thing that the governments have recently, and these are governments of 196 countries, this is, by the way, a legal requirement, and it's binding both internationally and nationally, which sets out the political, economic, and social rights of every child, regardless of where they are, their race, religion. Let's move on. So, if children have rights, but their rights have been denied, if large numbers, millions of children have no access to education, and educators have a responsibility, educators as well as governments have responsibility, what can change, or is there scope to change? One of the reasons teachers take up teaching job is that, and 75%, some of the research showed, is their desire to make a difference in the lives of children. 80% enjoy working with children, and that's their kind of incentive. However, many find that because of heavy workload, insufficient time to reflect the impact of their teaching beyond the exam results, they feel that they're demoralized. 47% said more freedom. There is need for more freedom to be creative, a time to reflect with colleagues across the subjects. This is what they believe would help their teaching. Let's see. Teachers are looked upon as individuals. You do carry huge responsibilities, and you know that. How easy is it for you to execute that responsibility? I think there are many hurdles on this, but you are still in many countries seen as natural leaders, as key players in securing change within the community. So not just for the child, but actually for the parents and their community. There is, I believe, educators as agents of change can challenge the social, the economic, and the cultural inequalities, but that's not asking educators to become activists or politically biased. I think it's very much about being objective in the teaching, but also allowing the child to understand their rights, what their expectations, and how to meet those expectations. And I think there are various ways that education, as educators, agents can, various tools that they can use to enable this without being labeled as political activists, because I think that's important. What is needed because of what's happening and the kind of new ways of working and understanding of the need to change the way education is people are being educated, is really redefining the purpose of education. A really great quote I found, I was doing some research on this. The true purpose of education is to ensure that children have what they need to be successful in life. That's not necessarily just numeracy and literacy, although that's where the heavy bias tends to be. As I said, teaching basic literacy is important, but what's really important is the formal and non-formal teaching, which includes things like music, languages, subjects related to local, social, cultural, environmental, and wide well-being. Students are increasingly voicing their concerns of injustices. We know what Greta Thunberg did in the US, where she took a day off from her school every week to make a point about the climate change. She's now got a huge following of young people, children, as well as younger students, who recognize the role that students can play in making governments and leaders accountable, holding them to account, and actually making them change in the way that they are operating, in the way that their operation impacts our lives. Everybody knows about what happened recently, hashtag Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement, where young people in Black Lives Matter across all colors came out and talked about the fact that there are certain groups of people that do matter, their lives do matter. Hashtag Me Too is very much about how women and girls, young women, are being sexually abused. So that again it made a huge impact in raising the awareness, and I'm hoping that things will change or begin to change. I think teachers must be prepared to be encouraged to handle the social justice topics such as these, to help the student understand the diverse nature of the world and their place, the student's place in it, so they can be better informed and prepared to tackle the real world problems. Today, we know that because things like racism, things like gender rights, harassment of women is not being taught in schools, it means a lot of students are leaving schools without a real true understanding of those real world problems. And I think teachers have a responsibility, I believe also should be encouraged. In the UK, there is a growing pressure to teach about, and this came from Black Lives Matter campaigns and protests. there is a growing pressure to teach about Black history, about slavery, about colonialism and its historical as well as contemporary impact on people, places, and planet. When I came out of school after I started in the UK, I must admit, I had no understanding of what colonialism meant. I had no understanding of its impact. The Bengal famine is something that I was not informed about. It was only later in my life, well into my adulthood, that I started to learn about these things. I think it's important that students are so that they can see what difficulties some of the communities have gone through and continue to go through, and be taught about how those need to be addressed. Very quickly, and I'm almost at the end of my presentation, it's about what it is that we need if we need to change the situation that we're in. I mentioned the problem. I also talked about what's not happening, what should be happening, but let's just talk a little bit about the kind of the overall expectation that needs to happen, overall action that needs to be taken. First of all, learning and teaching about social justice in schools, very, very important. And that also means the role of boys and girls, not from in the traditional sense, but in the modern sense, so in the contemporary world, treating people equally, the role, the way that learning and teaching happens for certain groups of communities. In the UK, it's a class issue. In countries like India, it be caste issues. In countries in the Africa, we're talking about the poor, the middle, and the higher income students or children of parents. There is a very strong need, a commitment from the governments to honor their duty to children and to teachers. There's something called the Sustainable Development Goals. You guys probably know about it. There are 17 of these. Goal 4 is about the promises made by governments across the globe to ensure not just access to education, but access to quality education. What I feel is missing in that is the definition of quality education right now doesn't include things like social justice, things like what justice is, things like discrimination, racism. I believe that needs to be part of that, and there's a bit of a gap there. In order to make sure that the situation of children is such, and parents is such, that it does allow them to send their children to schools, is a social protection system that covers not just access to quality education, but covers the other factors that often act as a hurdle to children getting education. And that is the health issue. It's the lack of access to basic services like water and sanitation. My job in India was very much about this. What I found in the rural areas, this was simply missing. I know there are some changes happening, but there needs to be an urgency on this. Teachers, parents, and communities, and I'm hoping that you guys will agree, all the educators will agree with me on this. I think there is a need to change in the way that we are teaching or we are being taught, and they should be encouraged and permitted to be innovative and be creative to develop that best education for children. Parents and communities play a very, very important role. I know some parents do, but I think it's limited. I think they believe it's a conversation with the teachers just to ask about how their child is doing, and it stops there. I think it stops there partly because the parents have not been encouraged or have not been incentivized to take that active role in school. That's where I'm going to end my presentation. What I'm hoping is I do get some feedback on this. I'm very, very keen to understand your point of view. So any feedback you can give through ENARC would be fantastic. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And thank you team at ENARC for reaching out to me. I very much hope you found this presentation useful. Thank you very much.